And we welcome you into America's Forum on this Thursday morning with Miranda Khan, J.D. Hayworth. Senate input on the Iranian nuclear deal, the big buzz around Washington yesterday. But Iran not the only national security concern after a postal worker from Florida lands his gyrocopter on the lawn of the United States Capitol.
Yeah, the video of the final seconds of the man's flight was captured by a spectator, and it opens the door, JD, to many questions.
Many questions indeed, including how the man went seemingly unnoticed as he traveled through the district's no-fly zone.
Now, the pilot, Doug Hughes, says he meant no harm and was just making a political statement about campaign financing. But did he just expose how vulnerable an attack on Washington really is, and how much of a concern there is of a cyber attack?
So, with this morning's intelligence briefing, let's turn to Colonel Derek Harvey, a former intelligence officer and former advisor to General David Petraeus. He is Skyping in from Tampa, Florida, and from Newsmax, Washington, my former congressional colleague, the former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Pete Hoekstra. Gentlemen, our thanks to you both. Colonel Harvey, we'll get to Iran shortly, but first, this gyrocopter penetration of D.C. air defense, is this just the latest in a string of intelligence failures?
Well, I think it is, and it highlights some vulnerabilities of Washington, D.C. And I think we owe some thanks to this postal worker for bringing this to the fore by his actions. It highlights some systemic and human behavior vulnerabilities that we have, whether it's in the effectiveness of the radar in the area or the failure of FAA and Capitol Police and the Secret Service to coordinate and get the information from the sources that were already investigating this issue. As far back as October, they interviewed this man, I think, twice.
Well, Pete Hoekstra, you and I were in Congress, and I remember one day being evacuated because of an airplane coming. It turned out the airplane contained our former colleague Ernie Fletcher when he was governor of Kentucky. There was some sort of miscommunication as he was flying back to Washington, and as I recall, there was a real threat that plane could have been shot down. So you have that in one sense, but then you have the gyrocopter today. What gives?
Well, what gives, JD, is we've got a Capitol and we've got public facilities in Washington, D.C. and all around the country that are always going to be vulnerable. You will never design a foolproof system. I don't think we applaud this gentleman at all for exposing the vulnerabilities that the Capitol faces. We know that they exist. We've seen the roadblocks, the things that pop up out of the road. We know that there are people and there's equipment on the buildings. We know what those vulnerabilities are. What this guy did, he needs to be taught a very, very serious lesson and be held accountable for what he did. Even though, he notified the White House, supposedly the newspaper knew about this. We will ask the question, why didn't the Capitol Hill police find out about this? But we got to start sending a message to people who do this, who jump the fence, that you start messing with security, which is a very serious issue around the Capitol and the White House, you'll get the book thrown at you and you're going to jail.
Colonel Harvey, let's switch gears now to another threat, that of cyber 9/11 of sorts. An intelligence officer wrote in an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, and he warns of that very thing, saying that the terrorists like ISIS are more sophisticated than ever. How concerned are you about a cyber 9/11 style attack?
Well, I think we should be very concerned about a cyber 9/11 attack, whether it's from a terrorist organization like the Islamic State or from a state-sponsored element, whether through an association or directly from the state like Iran or Russia or some other location. We have tremendous vulnerabilities. We still have gaps in our ability to coordinate and synchronize preventive measures. The intelligence communication between entities is still very weak. I know that Admiral Rogers and others at NSA are trying to move things forward, but we've got tremendous vulnerabilities for our critical infrastructure.
Well, let me just ask Pete Hoekstra. Pete, 30 seconds. There's a lag time, it seems, between recognizing a problem and dealing with it effectively. In your mind, is the government dealing effectively with the threat of a cyber 9/11?
Absolutely not. Colonel Harvey is absolutely right. There continue to be significant vulnerabilities. The private sector is not stepping up the way it needs to keep America safe. Government's lagging behind. This is the threat we've known about for an extended period of time. We just haven't come together and outlined a successful strategy to battle it.
Gentlemen, we thank you for your comments. We'd ask you to stay with us. When we come back, this much heralded Senate agreement on a bill to check on what happens with the nuclear deal with Iran. Is it really a great deal? That's coming up. With Miranda Kahn, J.D. Hayworth back with you on America's Forum, and reaction continues to come in to the agreement. The president saying, yeah, after all, it's probably a good idea for the Senate to have a say in the nuclear deal with Iran.
Yeah, the headline of our Newsmax.com article credits Tennessee Senator Bob Corker with asserting congressional foreign policy power and forcing the White House to concede.
But upon further reflection, is that really the case? Let's continue the conversation now with Colonel Derek Harvey and former Congressman Pete Hoekstra. So much to get to concerning Iran. First, the Washington angle. Senator Corker is credited with forcing action, but Pete, a couple of things happened. For example, in this legislation, I guess to get bipartisan agreement, he did not demand treaty ratification. As I understand it, Obama, as it stands right now, the president can basically have his way with only 34 votes in the Senate. Instead of a victory, is this a real setback for Senate Republicans?
No, I don't think it's a real setback for Senate Republicans or for the Senate or for Congress. Recognize to get anything done, they were going to have to get over 60 votes to begin with. And the real possibility was that Congress was going to be left totally out of this process. Corker and Menendez and Cardin, they crafted a bill which is going to give the Senate and Congress somewhat of a role in this process. It's better than what the alternative is, which is nothing, but it's not nearly enough of what you would like to have seen. But as long as you've got President Obama in the White House, this disastrous Iranian policy is going to continue to move forward, and the voice of Congress is going to be very limited.
Colonel, is it enough?
I think it's mainly a face-saving action by Congress, the U.S. Senate. I don't think it's determinative in setting the course for this deal at all. If I'm in Tehran today, I am very confident that I'm going to get the kind of deal that will allow me to do the things I want to do and become a nuclear power, probably even before the 10-year or 13-year mark is out.
So, by the Colonel's evaluation, Pete, it's face-saving on the part of the U.S. Senate, and I'm just wondering, the Netanyahu influence. He came, he addressed the joint session of Congress. It appeared the momentum was with him, but in the final analysis, is the vindictiveness of our president toward the Israeli prime minister, is it still very much apparent?
Oh, I think it's very much apparent. And remember, JD, I think we talked about this a couple of weeks ago when we were initially discussing the prospect of the Senate doing something. And I said, it's going to be very difficult for the Senate Democrats to stand up against their president and to really give substance to policy that may hinder and stop his plans for Iran going forward. That is exactly what happened. I think Iran, what should we have seen? A real plan to make sure they don't get a nuclear weapon. Real verification methods that said, we're not going to remove sanctions until we verify that you've changed behavior. We should have seen them renounce their support of terrorism. Here we are giving them this great deal. We're taking back sanctions, and they're aggressively moving forward in Lebanon and Syria and Yemen, promoting terrorism. They're threatening Israel. It's unbelievable. But Congress and foreign policy is just very limited in what they can do. I don't like it, but it's a realistic assessment.
Colonel, speaking of Israel, how do you think Israel's reacting to the news?
Well, I think initially they reacted somewhat favorably because they believe that Congress should have a role. But upon further review, I think they're going to come to the same conclusion. The Congress only has the ability at this point, per this agreement, to block this while it's under review. And the limits for that review period are about 60 days. There is going to be an up and down vote, but it doesn't hold the president accountable to having to, not move forward with the deal. It is face saving, and I think that's going to become clear to Tel Aviv down the road.
Well, let's circle back with the minute that remains, Colonel Harvey. We heard what Pete had to say about the likelihood of a cyber attack. During our days in Congress, we knew there were daily efforts to hack into the Pentagon. How worried are you within the next 3 to 4 years we will see a type of cyber 9/11, Derek Harvey?
Well, I think it's probably, a very good possibility. I can't give a percentage on that. It's hard to understand what the circumstances might be, but the capabilities and intent are out there. It's about timing and the determination of our foes. I'm more concerned about a state operation because they have more capability. I don't anticipate it coming from Iran in the near future because they're getting what they want. But Russia has been particularly malign in doing things against its neighbors like Estonia, where they basically shut down their internet system and their infrastructure in certain key areas for almost 2 weeks. And that happened this past January. I think they're building capabilities, they're understanding weaknesses, they're probing. And I think we need to be really concerned because of the aggressive nature of that regime.
Gotcha. Colonel Harvey, we thank you for your time as the Russian bear comes out of its cave and heads right for cyberspace. We've got more ahead on America's Forum.